Okay, it looks like people are rolling in, but we will get started in order to keep to time. So thank you so much to everyone who is joining online today. And so thank you for joining our webinar, which is entitled Rethink, Reimagine, Recover and Transforming How We Save Threatened Species. Hopefully you can see my screen. Can I get a thumbs up from the panelists? Excellent, thank you. Okay, so my name's Jessica Leck and I'm going to be your facilitator for this discussion today. I'm joining you today from Yuin Nation country on the south coast of New South Wales. And I would really like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I get to be a guest on today and that we're all joining from. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I really extend that respect to all First Nations people who are joining us today, as well as all Indigenous cultures from other nations around the world as they continue to lead us in our caring for country and biodiversity. I'd love for everyone to pop into the chat where you are joining from today. So tonight's event has been organised by OceanEarth Foundation, where our mission is to build resilient communities and reverse nature loss by unlocking transformational change. And if that's a new term for you, don't worry, we will define that for you tonight. We use systems thinking to scale programs that will create lasting change. We have a couple signature programs, one of which is my own baby, Ghost Nets Australia, where we work with communities across the Coral Triangle to remove ghost nets and stop plastics at their source. We also have Ocean Youth, which empowers young people across Australia and New Zealand to take action for our blue planet. Then we have our fee-for-service arm, which is TRMR, where we collaborate with governments, not-for-profits, communities and industry to embed systems thinking into conservation and natural resource management. Our goal is to help shift the sector beyond that short-term fixes towards lasting transformational change for both nature and people. So our conversation today is going to run for about 90 minutes and it is being recorded for anyone who can't join live, which is why we can't see all of our attendees' faces online, just to make it a more streamlined video. Our structure for tonight, first up, all of our speakers, who I will introduce in a second, are going to share a little bit about the work that they do and really set the content for the discussion that we're going to have. Then we'll move into a panel discussion exploring what might need to change or how we're currently doing things in threatened species management and how we approach that recovery. And then we'll be opening up to a Q&A. So I'd really like to invite the audience and people attending online to please utilize the chat throughout the whole discussion and pop your questions in there, because we will circle back. And if you're anything like me, you might forget that question when it comes time for it. So please do pop it in whenever it comes to mind throughout, and we'll cycle back. So before I get to introducing our panelists, I'd really like to set the scene with a bit of a quick reflection on what we mean by transformational change and why it matters in the context of threatened species management. In conservation, we often focus on treating the symptoms of decline. And in this space, that might mean fencing, monitoring, breeding programs, all of which are really important. But transformational change asks us to look a little deeper. It's about addressing those root causes, the unsustainable systems, the broken governance, the missing cultural connections or funding models that are keeping us in that reactive mode. When we apply a transformational lens to threatened species recovery, it can challenge the way we've traditionally been doing things. It really pushes us to think beyond that single species fix and ask what needs to shift in the systems that are putting these species at risk in the first place. So that's kind of the heart and the core of what we're hoping to explore today. And the work of each of our speakers has been selected to be featured because they really come at that in a very tangible way that can lay some foundations for understandings for this kind of very vague concept that we might not always really be able to grapple with. So with that, I would love to introduce us to our amazing panelists. So tonight we are joined by Mark Urmis, Matt Singleton, Simon Musto and Tia Poole. And I'm going to let most of them introduce themselves, but I will give a quick little introduction. So first up, we're going to hear from Matt. Matt is the Chief Operating Officer at Odana, an organization dedicated to saving species and fostering biodiversity through innovation and collaboration. His experience spans threatened species recovery, landscape scale conservation, and empowering First Nations leadership as a pathway to ecological and cultural restoration. And with that, I'll hand over to Matt.
Thanks so much, Jess. And I'd just like to say that I'm joining you from Bunurong and Wurundjeri country down here in Melbourne, and would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Yeah, really exciting to be here today, and keen to talk a little bit around the work that OceanEarth does, as well as talk to some really cool questions. So without further ado, yeah, OceanEarth Foundation, we're an environmental not-for-profit with the simple slogan of "We Save Species." Our focus is on threatened species recovery, treating some of those immediate symptoms, and then looking at recovering species for long-term outcomes. So over the next decade, we're working towards our targeted goal of what we're calling 505, which is effectively a recovery model based around preserving the evolutionary resilience of threatened species, particularly using sanctuaries and broader landscape recovery efforts as the key tools. So what we see with a lot of the species we work with are that they've basically dwindled down into really, really small numbers. So take the eastern barred bandicoot as an example. Their numbers were down into, I think there was around 80 that were discovered in the car tip in Hamilton, thought to be extinct. And effectively how you take a species from an extremely small number of individuals to a stage where they can effectively be downlisted in conservation advice and reduce that extinction threat is a process that we're uncovering for these. And what we're also finding is that while it is a species-centric approach, as you sort of referred to there, Jess, critically, these species have evolved with the landscape and each individual species plays an important critical function within ecosystems. And so by bringing these species back to the landscape, we're actually understanding how the broader ecosystem reparation work occurs and works. And it's been a fascinating process of learning by doing, because a lot of the species that we work with have not many people living have seen them on the mainland, basically. So our model is really dependent on, or it's a very lean model. We're not a large organisation, so partnerships is really key. And in particular, working with landholders and First Nations groups is a key focus. So we don't focus on raising funds to purchase properties and lands. We partner in with everyone we do our work with, setting in really strong relationships. And one of those sort of models and part of the engagement is our OceanEarth Academy program, which sits under our operational banner, which effectively is a program that teaches and educates landholders on how to look at threatened species conservation and recovery on their properties, focusing not just on conservation focused properties, but also in the agricultural and renewable energy sectors as well. So one of our properties, for example, is a 1,000-hectare fully working merino sheep farm where we run a few thousand head of sheep and also a few thousand head of bandicoots and quolls, which I don't think many other farms in Australia can talk to that. So it's a pretty cool model. But yeah, really excited to be here today and to talk through what is a critical effort that we need to look at moving forward of how we do transform the way we save species for that longer term mindset. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really, really follow closely the work that you guys do, and it's really fantastic. Okay, next up, we're going to hear from Simon Musto. Simon is an ecosystem specialist, author, and conservation consultant. Through his work with OceanEarth Foundation, our very own, and Restore the Bay, Simon advocates for conservation approaches rooted in ecosystem dynamics, human behaviour, and collective impact. His books explore the link between wildlife and future of humanity, and I highly recommend them. I'm halfway through his most recent one myself. I'm handing over to Simon.
Great, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I'm not going to do a further introductions. I think that was wonderful. I actually want to start with some questions for our audience. So I have three questions for you. The first question is, do you regularly go outdoors to pursue an interest and create better balance in your life? And if you answer yes to that question, do you go to specific places or a place that makes you feel good? And if you answer yes to that question, does it depend on that place having a healthy ecosystem for you to enjoy? Now, there's a good chance you answered yes to all those questions, and if so, you're not alone. I asked 100 people, in fact, from all ages and walks of life, the same questions. Then I asked them to estimate the percentage of their personal productivity that depended on a healthy ecosystem. So on average, people equate over half of their personal productivity to nature. So most commonly 60 to 80%. So if you answered yes to all three questions, you've just proved to yourself the innate connection we all have with nature. So when we act to conserve wildlife, what we're actually doing is we're altering the ecosystem and affecting the very foundation of our own society and economy. But the measures we use aren't monetary. In fact, if you spend the time talking to community groups, they never talk from a position of accounting for nature. They talk about the way they feel. They talk about their emotions. They talk about their sense of community. And these are what we call cultural services, the cultural services that nature provides for us. And indeed, it's believed that for every dollar we spend today on nature, we can recoup up to 30 times more community benefit than we're currently getting from degrading nature. And most of that benefit is made up in the way you feel. So when you feel good, you're productive. And when you're productive, we have a strong economy, which means community-led programs not only necessary, but essential for conservation to become transformational, because everything we do for conservation or otherwise is making a big difference to your lives, and you deserve a say in this. So what is true community participation is an obvious question. When I talk to community groups, it's really tough, okay? Not necessarily for the reasons we think. It's not something that comes particularly naturally. It takes determination to cut through the rhetoric. Oh, that will never work, I hear. There isn't enough money. People are the problem. What are you going to do about it is a common question. Or no one cares what I think. The objections are endless, but it's not about talking at people. It's about disposing of words like education and teaching. It's about enabling the community to talk to each other. So it's to get people to talk across the room rather than us talking down the room to them. It takes about 1,000 species of reef fish to create an ecosystem, but only one or two species do specific jobs within that. And most communities have at least 1,000 people with diversified roles. So with a bit of help to understand how their values connect to the land they live on, they clearly have the knowledge to make wise decisions. And anyone in conservation knows that among the greatest obstacles is the conflict between conservationists, between members of a community. And that's why organizations tend to become isolated from communities. The problem is, of course, that the obstacle still remains. And so scaling and transforming society requires a genuine and true community participatory approach. Which brings me to Restore the Bay. We're doing a few things differently with this project. It's a really exciting program. We're allowing the community to co-lead and co-design every aspect of the work by talking to each other. And we're gathering that wisdom and we're putting it into a framework that they can share and understand. So every aspect of the program is community-led. And what's really amazing me already is that we're hearing the community identify precisely the same components of importance that we might have come up with ourselves. But we're also finding that very different sectors of the economy that would normally be at conflict are having this exact same values and coming up with ideas together. And they're also just beginning to ask very precise questions that indicate a very high level of regard for the process, for ecology and a community's own connection to the landscape. So it's enabling a whole community to imagine new possibilities that might include restoring wildlife populations, which will ultimately have, we hope, a greater chance of success because the community will be involved and those decisions will be socially prioritized. So in a way, what we're doing is we're asking the three questions I asked at the start, but in a more sophisticated manner, and it leads to one inevitable conclusion, that all our shared values flow back through clearly identifiable ecosystem features. And connecting those features together allows us to create a model. So what I've got in front of here is a simplified version of what we're creating: actions, threats, and pressures impact an ecosystem. We have a pretty good idea how that works already, right? I think everyone in this room would understand that. What we don't know is how those effects on those ecosystem features then translate into impacts on our community values, positive or negative. There's 3 broken links in the chain. Penguins, for example, provide a service. They provide services that are financial in terms of, say, employment. They also provide services that are intangible, like cultural services, aesthetics. They get people out in the water. There's also regulatory processes, of course, the trophic dynamics of those things. Putting those 3 things together and linking that part of the chain is probably, it's more or less a first for Australia in the way we're doing it, and that's what makes this project really exciting. So final wrap up, what we're leading to is an evaluation which identifies the community's values as part of nature. It enables communities to learn from each other, reveals shared values and knowledge, and it inspires actions and win-wins across the community by identifying more precisely where and how the community can act to have the greatest benefit for all. And because we can model those outcomes and forecast those likely benefits, we can work out how much value we all stand to gain as a society from protecting the land and wildlife on which we depend. There's a lovely quote by the economist Ralph Chammy. He asked recently, what if a whale could speak to us? What if it could ask, what can I do for you, so I can continue providing the service I provide to you as part of our community? Now, note the whale didn't say, this is what I can do for you. The whale asked, what can I do for you? When we make it a requirement for society to pay for the protection of animals outside their role in ecosystems and the services and values we all share and benefit from, it doesn't work. By approaching conservation from a community perspective, it isn't more expensive or complex. It's different, sure, but it's also easier. It leads to less complicated outcomes because it avoids those inevitable conflicts. It costs less, it's less risky, and it's more sustainable. It's freeing. So in being truly community-led, we value what wildlife does for us, allowing animals freedom to rebuild healthy places so people can be productive and ultimately maintain a thriving economy.
Thank you so much, Simon. What a wonderful wrap up of the whole concept that we'll explore deeper into our conversation, I'm sure. Okay, next up, I want to introduce our audience to Tia Paul. Tia works with Project Restore, a world-leading seascape restoration initiative combining 4 major programs: Operation Crayweed, Operation Posidonia, Reef Pods, and Living Sea Walls. I'm sure these are terms familiar to many people from Australia within the room. Her work focuses on restoring the endangered seagrass Posidonia australis, blending science, underwater restoration, and community engagement to regenerate marine ecosystems in Sydney Harbour.
Amazing. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, very excited to be here today and to chat about what we're doing at Project Restore. Yeah, I think that's a really good sort of wrap up of everything that's going on. But to just add a little bit more, Project Restore is it's a seascape restoration project based in Sydney Harbour, with the view of being able to apply what we learn and the methodologies that we're using to urbanised areas worldwide eventually. So to begin with, Project Restore is a 3-year project. We're coming into our last year of the project now, so things are really starting to get quite exciting. And there'll probably be a few things that'll come up later when we start to chat on the panel, which I'll hold for then. But Project Restore is essentially funded by the New South Wales Environmental Trust. And we're also working in partnership with the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water as part of a wider program called Seabirds to Seascapes. So within this project, Taronga and DQ essentially look after quantifying seals and penguins within the harbour and further within the harbour, but also further on the New South Wales coastline as well. And then Project Restore is essentially looking at trying to restore seascapes. So the point of difference with this project is that we're not only looking at single habitats, but also looking at how we can combine restoration across habitats to try and get the most, the best outcome for biodiversity. Today, I'll be focusing more on the Operation Posidonia side of our project because that is looking at the endangered seagrass, Posidonia australis. So I'll be going into more information about sort of how we're restoring the meadows during the panel discussion. But I also just wanted to touch on sort of the process that we use for those that aren't aware. Operation Posidonia has been working since about 2018. So it is a long-standing project, and we're very lucky to be able to use the methodologies that they've already developed within that project in Project Restore. So we essentially take washed up beach fragments of this endangered seagrass, and we rely really heavily on the community to actually collect those seagrasses and drop them off, which we then essentially keep at our site in Sydney Harbour at the Sydney Institute of Marine Science before we can then go out and replant these seagrass shoots. So we're very lucky to have had help from the community to collect over 8,000 seagrass shoots since the start of Project Restore. And we've been able to plant around 4,000 of those shoots back into the harbour, which is pretty exciting. And it looks quite cool now. We're starting to see these meadows come back in the areas that we've been planting, and the fish species using them already. Even when we're there planting, we start to see these small juvenile fish come in and use it as we're in the moment. So it's a really exciting part of the project. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now. We can get into more of it later on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. And finally, we are joined by Marc Oramus. Marc is a marine biologist and regional lead for WWF France, based in New Caledonia. His focus has spanned cetaceans, dugongs, and sea turtles. And he brings deep insight into projects that we'll be talking about today, shell bank and turtle conservation efforts across the South Pacific, where local cultural systems and species survival are deeply intertwined. Oh, sorry, I zoomed in and now I'm going to zoom back out. Over to you, Marc.
Thanks very much, Jessica, and thanks in advance to all the audience for my French accent. I'll try to be as clear as possible. So very happy to be here with you today. I'll be presenting a very, very quick overview of the current marine turtle program for the WWF network on behalf of Chris Madden, our lead on this program, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and try to give you a very quick insight on how we urgently need some new innovative approach to recover the marine turtle population. So those marine turtles, they're really essential to the role, to the ocean health, the culture, the economies of a country. And despite what we could say are very significant conservation on the species, well, 6 of the 7 species of marine turtle are still globally threatened. And so they face threats all across their life stage, including some unsustainable harvesting, illegal trade, bycatch, climate change, etc. So as I said, we do need innovative approach to recover those turtle population. What I'll give you is a very quick overview of the current global program for the WWF network. And this is a program that will be running until 2030, sorry. It's tried to involve, and it already involved, a large number of offices in the network. You can move to the other side. Sorry, just I have many slides. I'm going to keep waving. So yeah, the WWF network involves a lot of people with some interest with turtle issues, and so we're working across the world with a number of offices on this issue. If I had to highlight how important this issue is, I can just quickly show you some numbers that very how can I say that? Very immense scale of the turtle exploitation here that I showed on this picture, and it shows why it is very urgent to act on those guys. But the problem that we have is that we have a lot of trouble prioritizing our action on those animals. So our goal on this new programmation for the network is to work to build evidence to help drive action. And for that, we are working around 3 main projects that are all connected, and those projects are Shellbank, Turtle Use Project, and Blue Corridors for Turtles. And I'll give you a very quick overview of what those projects are, starting with Shellbank. So one of the biggest challenge for turtle conservation is clearly the lack of traceability when you try to fight against illegal take and traffic. And there is indeed a very big gap that affects both the law enforcement side of things and the conservation research, which limits our ability to protect those species effectively. On the law enforcement side, it's difficult to trace where the illegal products made from the marine turtles are from, like, for example, Oxbill shell. And so Shellbank is really a project that originally started as a solution to address this traceability gap and help help the law enforcer to link the seized project back to the original population. But then we quickly realized also that Shellbank was a very interesting tool to play a crucial role in conservation research, because by using DNA analysis, you can track the turtle population and help identify the key nesting sites from where they're coming from, and help monitor the conservation effort and see if you have a real impact on those population. There is a whole range of tools on Shellbank. I won't go through them, but now we do also have a platform online, a website that is really a one-stop resource for all the law enforcement agencies, the researcher, the conservationists who want to trace and track their marine turtle using genetic data. And it's already over 12,000 samples, and it's continually growing now with supporting efforts worldwide. The second project that is included in the global program is the Turtle Use Project. We know very little about how many turtles are taken, why they are taken, and what is the driving for their use and their trade. And if we are to address sustainable use and trade while supporting the sustainable community development, well, it's very important to understand the deeper motivation behind those community turtle use and trade. And it is how we will enable the stakeholders to also develop and implement some effective conservation, but also provide some economic alternatives and our livelihoods recommendation for the communities. So this is what the Turtle Use Project do, and it does work with different communities and try to collect all this information. It's kind of a two-stage program, really. It's first to gain a better understanding of the cultural, the social, and the economic importance of those marine turtles for the coastal communities, but also a second step that is to define where the take and the trade is considered unsustainable in order to build with the community some capacity for sustainable development. So it's been deployed in a number of countries already: Fiji, PNG, Tonga, Papua New Guinea. Tonga here on this slide is shown as an example, and shows some very interesting results on the fact that the motivation, for instance, of the turtle use are not necessarily the same depending on the country. So when the motivations are the same, the solution to go against unsustainable takes won't be the same depending on those motivations. And this is what we're trying to take into account. So now the project is running, and it's also have a goal through this new program to expand on new geography, to try to apply a Turtle Use Project as a consistent methodology, and that will allow a more direct and quantitative comparison of turtle use between the different project sites and countries. The last project that we are running through this program is the Blue Corridors for Turtles project. And well, here it starts from the view that the approach for marine turtle conservation are either top-down and exclusive of communities, or they are too localized to influence the regional and global framework that you need to take into account for those species. So we do need something that is more inclusive and collaborative approach that kind of bridge the gaps between the locally led science and the global policy. And local conservation efforts are rarely linked across ocean basin. Because there are still major knowledge gaps continue to limit our understanding of marine turtles connectivity and conservation trends, and tend to bias towards certain region and certain species. So we go through a number of limitations. We have a strong focus on nesting beach on some species and some species. So we are biased toward looking at females, and we are biased in certain region and certain, and our view are rather incomplete. When you look at the genetic data, well, you realize there are a lot of data available around the world, but they're still very much under collected in many places. And overall, they are very underused also to get a very big understanding of what's happening. And finally, the satellite tracking data is also very important. Marine turtles are probably one of the most satellite tracked species. There are actually more than 12,000 turtles have been tracked with satellite recording. But there is a huge amount of data, but the accessibility of this data and the use of this data is really complicated. And marine turtles are globally, those data sets exist in a number of places. But when you look at them independently, well, if you take one of them, for example, the SWOT database is probably one of the biggest. Well, you see that it only uses about 10% of all the satellite data available worldwide. So basically, all that to point out that we do have a lot of knowledge, but also some gaps. But a lot of this knowledge is still not connected. And this is what we need. We do need to connect those different types of knowledge, and it's what we're trying to do through the Blue Corridor project, in order to finally compile all the spatial information and get a better understanding of the distribution and the connectivity of those different turtle population. And so I won't go through the main activities, but basically we are collecting and collating all this spatial data existing throughout the world through a number of collaboration, and then we'll be conducting connectivity analysis. We'll be integrating that data with threat analysis, and trying to identify the population basically that are more at risk, the population where we need to concentrate most of our action and our resources. And through this kind of effort, we'll be able to manage and to define the important marine turtle areas around the world, which will be also able to be included into frameworks such as the 30 by 30 by proposing supervised highways and stuff like that. It's a project that is where Shellbank contributes a fundamental layer also. We do use the satellite data with the genetic data and the nesting site all together to help prioritize those conservation issues. I think I just got a last slide. So basically what we aim to do through those three projects is to create evidence and deliver tools and innovation that will help us to have a more efficient, sorry, I'm missing the word here, but be more efficient in prioritizing our action and get better protection, also by helping to connect all the different actors that are involved in the turtle issues, from local communities to scientific team to all the regional organizations, which are still lacking a lot of connection to these days. And I think that was the last one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much from all the panelists. I hope that for the attendees, that gave you a really good perspective of how each of these projects are very clearly working in the space, but each of them have taken a really a broader scale or scope approach to something, whether it's really appreciating the role of community, or the fact that animals don't care about the silly little lines that we draw on the map, or the fact that they're only one species within a greater ecosystem that need to work together to exist. So that's kind of that broader scope is really what we're trying to explore here today. So now I would like to move into the panel discussion part of this evening. So first up, our first question. Species versus ecosystem is kind of a long-running tension in conservation. Single species management can be really politically powerful and also easy to fund, but it can be ecologically limited. So from your perspective, what are the strengths and limitations of focusing on an individual species? And how do you navigate that tension in your work? I'd like to start this conversation by throwing to Simon, because I know he's going to have quite an interesting perspective on this. And then we can jump to our other panelists.
Just try not to offend anyone. Yeah, okay. So I made some notes earlier, and I the first note I made was I disagree wholeheartedly with the statement this can be ecologically limited. Okay, so I think, and I'll explain what I mean in a moment. Single species management, it's also called what? Flagship species, iconic species, keystone species conservation. I don't, it's not just essential, it works, okay? But I think once again, it works if it's community-led. I'm going to be oversimplifying to some degree here, but where such programs are community-focused, for example, around, say, koalas, it's been shown that building an understanding of community interaction actually disproves some of the scientific rhetoric about single species conservation failing. In fact, communities are far more accepting of conservation in general when they're able to be custodians of a species that they have agency with and are culturally connected to already. I think we can confuse, sometimes the science can confuse by thinking separately, putting people aside, separating them from nature and seeing the animal as the problem, when in fact the problem might just be the approach we're taking to it. From an ecological perspective, also large mammalian herbivores and predators, which mostly are these iconic species, tend to be the only thing holding the ecosystem together and making it function anyway. So this is a simple fact that the majority of scientific research has never considered the role of animals in any form whatsoever. I'm constantly having to do research to look at this, and it is so hard to find a single scientific study that says, what does this animal actually do and how does it function as an animal? You can find plenty of things from the other end, but you can find very little on that. So I think to some degree, it's a bit of a theoretical debate. I think where animals exist in a sort of virtual reality and isolated from their environment, it can be rather moot. And how are we navigating this, the final part of the question, I think possibly by being among the few conservation projects where we're putting community first and we're actually connecting wildlife function to ecosystem services and community values. And I think that's where it opens up this whole new story and narrative, which is so wonderful and positive for conservation. But I say I probably oversimplified a lot there. I'm expecting others to have a different opinion.
And that's why we're all here today. That's great. Thank you. I might jump to Matt next.
Yeah, I think just sort of reiterating and building on what Simon said, it can be quite a theoretical debate, but you know, I'll share one of my first experiences out at Mount Rothwell, for example, studying there as a volunteer, almost 8 years ago now. Looking at Eastern barred bandicoot, just sitting there doing its thing, turning over the soil, digging tiny little conical holes, and looking at that animal going, that single animal is going to do far more for the environment than what I can ever do in my entire lifetime, probably in the space of a night. And so understanding that functional piece is really critical. And I think, you know, a real key shift in focus for Odinata is moving away from I guess the story around the species as it is and the history of the species, but more so to what it does. So what does that actually digging process mean, and how does it impact broader things? I look at disaster management, for example. Like we've had, you know, high rainfall events, which in the past would have absolutely flattened infrastructure on the site, which we're now not seeing even touch the surface because the soils are functioning so well that they're effectively sponging up those sort of water runoffs and some of these anecdotal pieces, which now we're, you know, converting into research and evidence to, again, address what Simon said. We need to start to really draw these links between species function and some of these iconic species. You know, there's a lot of around the rewilding movement around the world and whatnot, a lot of those sort of, you know, the Yellowstone stories and things like that, but there's fundamentally a whole lot of depth underneath across every species on the planet that we're just scratching the surface on. And so telling those stories of how an eastern barred bandicoot or a rufous bettong, the species that we sort of focus on at flagships, but why we're focusing on them for the broader ecosystem benefits, I think is the real critical shift. And it is a communications piece, it's a scientific research piece, and then it's an operationalizing piece with that, because we need to make sure we're scaling this work. It's no point having these animals just in captive facilities or even within sanctuaries. We need to get them out into the landscape at abundance, serving their function. So it's I would probably say it's a bit of both, and finding the balance of both is really critical.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with one of the reasons I love the work that Ordana does is that you're not focusing necessarily, you are choosing your flagstone species that have that ecosystem role, not just purely based on the marketing campaign that they're cute. So
yeah, absolutely. But they are cute too, which is not.
They are, they're adorable. I strongly believe that if Quolls had the marketing campaign of koalas, we might be in a different place. Okay, thank you so much. Next up, I will throw to Tia.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, look, I agree with the sentiment so far. I think both are really important, and it's certainly something that we've thought about in Project Restore, and sort of combining the idea of the seascape restoration. So particularly with Operation Posidonia and the seagrass, and actually being able to combine the restoration with doing, say, kelp reforestation or installing living seawalls, and how it can increase the biodiversity in the overall area, and how actually doing multiple restoration methods in one site can actually impact the marine species overall, rather than just looking at one siloed. So I think, yeah, it's hard for me to think about a limitation. Obviously, when it comes to getting funding and stuff, it can be more complicated for you to be able to pitch and get over the line, because it just sort of adds in multiple layers. But I think when you can really start to look at things holistically, and sort of that is what the environment is, you know, it's not one single thing, everything is connected. So I think this is something that has been sort of under the underlying theme for everything that we've been doing at Project Restore. And yeah, I think it's super important. Yeah.
I think you touched on a really important thing there, because yeah, it is hard to find a limiting factor, but it hasn't been done in the past because it's so much easier to sell, and especially to funders and to the community, and to, you know, a photograph of a single species. So yeah, I think like Matt said, it's that communication piece and that education piece. Thank you. All right, Mark.
Yeah, well, it's kind of tricky to elaborate on that, but if yeah, you're right. It's always easier, clearly, in my experience, to attract attention from the public, from the politics and the decision takers of the world, but also the donors, to have a focus, a species focus. The problem and the limitation that so that's a very important point, because that's what we need to start with to develop a project. We need some resources, and we need some political push to make sure that we're making progress on those. The limitation is also directly linked to those resources, obviously. But if we had infinite resources to do the species focused project, we would be forced to obviously take into account the ecosystem level to really go for the impact that we're looking for. There's no way around it. If you just trying to sort out a couple of threats specifically without taking into account the ecosystem level, well, you're just gonna have a limited impact on your work. And I don't know how to explain that, but if well, sorry, I'm just bugging here. But if well, the limitation I found is that the species focus is always limited by some kind of frame where you basically can't deploy all the theory of change that you would like and that you know is necessary to really make a difference. Sorry, that was very confused.
No, it makes perfect sense. It is, yeah, that limiting scope is definitely part of what I've at least found. And never apologize, because you are speaking in a second language, which most people can't do. So you're doing a fantastic job. Okay, so my next question was, based on your experience, what tends to go wrong in the way that threatened species projects are designed or delivered? What patterns have you noticed that make projects less effective or less sustainable than they could be? And I'll start with Matt this time.
Mute there. Yeah, it's it's a big question. There's a lot to go right, but clearly there's species are still becoming threatened by the day. So there's lots that we need to do. And so yeah, I mean, picking out one particular wrong thing probably seems a little bit unfair, but more broadly, I think that a good understanding of the different skill sets and the broad range of skill sets brought to projects has helped identify sort of gaps that needed to be filled, whether that be, you know, knowledge gaps or practicality implementation gaps or fundraising and some of the high level engagement stuff when it comes to the funding piece. And so I think I think it takes a broad church to get a program running effectively, and bringing in different types of skill sets and different groups is really key. And when that's sort of not addressed, when it's particularly narrowed knowledge, I think we can find heading down certain directions that get weighed and weighted, as opposed to that sort of more broad tent approach where, you know, a lot of these threatening processes and even sort of the symptoms as a result of those threatening processes, you know, if you think about who we're actually coming up against, we're coming up against some of the highest level strategy minds, corporate entities, like these people that are paid probably millions of dollars to try and avoid some of the work that we're doing. So you've got to kind of take that real strategic approach to how you're building these teams and programs to address that. And I think that, I think that's something that we've, again, really focused on in terms of saving our recruitment within OceanEarth, you know, having a good balance of, you know, your traditional sciences versus, you know, your sort of more field-based operational team versus, you know, your team that's sort of based, you know, OceanEarth run an advisory business. We do something pretty similar as well to diversify income streams and the business strategy behind the foundation as well. And all of these different pieces, people bringing their strengths, working in an effective manner, I think is really, really critical. We're not asking our field ranger to be out there applying for grants because, and sort of vice versa. So getting into that mindset and a real understanding of strengths and maximizing strengths mindset, I think is a really key thing.
Yeah, definitely. And you've definitely picked up on something that I don't think a lot of the industry appreciates on that one. Okay, thank you. I will throw to Mark on your thoughts on this one.
Yeah. Oh yeah, my mic isn't. Yeah, well, I guess a very typical problem with this project is the fact that very often the action that are put into places for threatened species are primarily the easy action, the one that are simpler to deliver, but without really a strategic view of whether it's the good one at the right time, and often because you answer to opportunities and to some local context, you do things, but you don't really always have the possibility, or you don't do it to ask yourself whether you are doing the good thing at the right time with the right people, and basically you're taking it the wrong way. One of the problem also that is kind of typical, I found, is the time constraint of the project. Most of these initiatives are very often constrained in time, which is not compatible with the reality of what you need to deploy to really make a change. and this time is often quite a long term, and you do need sometimes to have an implication not on 4 years, not on 5 years, but on 10 to 20 years, and that's very difficult to do with those projects. So clearly that's a limitation, very important for me.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Funding on ecological timescales, not political timescales. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Next up, I'll throw to Simon for your thoughts on this one.
This is the question I was most worried about answering, because it's a really, like Matt said, it's kind of, where do you start? There's so many things. I think it's an interesting idea that we have a perception on what is right and wrong to begin with, and so putting aside all of the practical realities that Mark and Matt talked about, which are absolutely, definitely, obviously need doing, there's also this other component to ecosystems, which is that they do unexpected and surprising things. So I think one of the things we need to probably do better as a society is understand that the underlying complexity of ecosystems means that we will never actually know or be able to forecast precisely what will happen in the future. That there's a certain amount of courage required, and I think a lot of projects, like Mark was pointing out, probably get stopped when certain KPIs, key performance indicators, don't get met. But those indicators may not be the right ones, because ecosystems take a twist and turn. There's a lovely paper published just a few days ago in Australia showing that 20 to 37% of species are doing the opposite of what we expected them to do due to climate change, so actually moving into hotter climes, which is a really positive story, but it's a really beautiful example of where, if we use our current knowledge and just assume that we can do something that will have this outcome, it's probably about 30% of occasions when it'll be completely different. So we have to enable ourselves to understand the system's complexity, to build the capacity for ecosystems to evolve themselves, for animals to have autonomy to do what they need to do, to guide to a certain degree the outcomes we're looking for threatened species, but also be prepared to adapt and change and modify our expectations as we go along to achieve an outcome that may be a little bit different to what we expect. So I think when we see the power of nature to do that, to restore, as Matt pointed out earlier, it is remarkable. So I would say that, yeah, that's where we need to guide our vision a little bit more towards a real reality of what nature can do for us.
Yeah, definitely. And making space and, a willingness to understand that complexity, or at least allow it to exist. I agree. Thank you. Okay. And Tia, I would love your thoughts on this one.
Good. Yeah, look, I think I completely agree with what everyone said so far, to be honest. There's definitely a common thread emerging. I think, yeah, one of the biggest things that we have sort of faced is that we're a 3-year program. And it's taken us 3 years to sort of get to the point where we're at now. We've done stuff and we've achieved milestones, but we've been set back from licensing and approvals. So we've lost quite a bit of time from that. So I think for us to be able to do these projects and roll out these projects, you just need longer term projects, longer term funding. 10 to 20 years is absolutely primo. That would be amazing. And I think it's not only the time to be able to do the work, but even resourcing, as Matt was mentioning before, and finding the right people. And I think as the projects, even as they develop and you start to roll them out, you see the need for different resources or roles within the actual team itself. So I think it's kind of both longer funding terms for the project and for the outcomes, particularly with restoration, and some of the species that we're working on are quite slow. So we just, from the get-go, we needed more time. So yeah, the list goes on, but I'll keep it there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that short-term timescale is a pain that can be felt across our entire industry. Thank you. Okay, our third question. So many projects manage the symptoms of decline, but as we've discussed, might not be looking at the causes of that decline. In your view, what are the biggest barriers to achieving that long-term recovery for threatened species? So We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if we're going a bit broader scale and we're talking about the whole industry and we're talking about the systems that we work within, we've got policy or funding or social factor or institutions. If you had to pick one, you know, what do you think are the biggest barriers to making that shift that we're talking about? And I will start with, who hasn't gone first? Tia, we'll throw straight back to you.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, I think you said to pick one, but there's three things for me here. There's a bit of a hierarchy, I suppose, but yeah, I think the first one in particular for us has just been getting the approvals to be able to actually do the work and start. So we've been waiting around 2 years to actually get the approvals for us to be able to begin the work. Getting to that point and navigating who to speak to and what the pathways are were really difficult for us. So I think even the policy behind that and trying to get those that are actually making the decisions on board so that they're more likely to actually approve our permits to want to restore, that's been a really difficult pathway. Number two is, yeah, that social part of it. So social license. I think the best example that I can give for what we're doing is that part of our Posidonia restoration, we're actually trying to get to the core of why the problem's happening. So in Sydney Harbour, one of the biggest impacts on the remaining seagrass meadows is moorings, so traditional boat moorings, where you have the big heavy chain on the mooring block that swings around and essentially rips out all of the seagrass. And over time, you can see these mooring scars that are actually occurring. So we're essentially trying to go back to the root of the problem and trying to sort of change people's perception on actually removing these traditional block and chain moorings with environmentally friendly swing moorings. So they essentially have a neutrally buoyant chain, essentially, not a chain, but like a rubber system up to the boat. So we're working really hard to try and get people to sort of change their perception and accept that there is something else that they can do, but we still can have a really good outcome for the environment as well. So as part of our project, we have funding to be able to replace up to 10 traditional moorings into environmentally friendly moorings. So a really big part of you know, people's lifestyle in Sydney, if they're into the harbour and into boating, and they have their boat on one of these traditional moorings, we are sort of faced with the challenge of trying to educate them and yeah, I guess try and accept a new technology, which is interesting. So yeah, I think that's the second one. And then the third one for us is, yeah, just that long-term monitoring that I mentioned before. Yeah, I think being able to sort of have success in those three areas would really help for the long-term recovery, particularly for Posidonia, for what we're doing. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I will throw to Simon next.
Such good questions with so many answers. I completely agree with Tia. And in fact, one of the primary things I was going to say was that, unfortunately, probably the biggest obstacle that we have is the policy that enables it becoming the obstacle and disabling those actions in the first place. And that's particularly in the case of community projects, because communities don't tend to be trusted with making, or they want to go and take an action, but they're not considered to have authority or have reliability and so on, which is not necessarily the case at all. And again, it goes against what I was saying earlier about having the courage to be able to let people persist in what they're doing and attempt outcomes that they have new ideas for. And so we've kind of created this sort of institutionalized framework, and the people who created it, unfortunately, the people who have the most agency in that are the ones that have created the problems already for themselves. But when we try and scale, I think when we try and scale this, we need to open it up to communities. That's going to increasingly become a problem. I would say, though, on the plus side, actually, I was just thinking while we were talking to it, if approaching this in the sort of reverse way, where you actually establish your social license through involving community, and then the monitoring doesn't become necessarily the monitoring of the seagrass, but the monitoring of the values that come out of that. Now, in doing that, you actually gain the social license. And when you get the social license, you gain the socio-political clout to be able to then unblock the other obstacles. So sometimes coming at it from the community perspective from the opposite end can help to sort of ease that off a little bit. And I think as time progresses, that will become simpler and simpler as community-led and co-design programs become more commonplace.
Thank you. Solving problems in real time. I love it. I love it. Okay, let's throw over to Mark to get your perspective.
It's easier said than done, though.
It's again not a fast process by any means.
Mark. Yeah, thanks. Well, very, very interesting. Not very easy to go after Simon, but very interesting. Yeah, well, I guess in my experience, to go back to the root of your question, it's I guess not so much a problem of managing symptoms instead of the real cause, I guess, but it's maybe my experience on my project, but it's more a question or a problem of managing only part of the cause and not going after all the cause. If I take an example that I know a little bit about on poaching threatened species, well, obviously, if you go after the poacher, well, you could answer part of the problem, but you're definitely not going to answer all of it because you're not going after the cause of, what is the reason for the demand? Are the demand and from the trafficant? What are the need for the local communities from where the poachers are coming from? Poverty, all the things that you can imagine. And from the few cases where it's been possible to achieve zero poaching on threatened species, I think that the only solution that worked was that they actually go after all the causes at the same time with a very combined efforts that will involving the communities that are in there and bring them solution, making them part of the solution, working from the justice side of things, having obviously the policy that goes after that, the science that needs to bring the gap of knowledge. And it's really all the surveillance, everything. But it did work because they attacked the problem from all sides. And that's what makes the difference. If you go one after the other, on a very long period of time, they're all disconnected. Well, there's no chance this is going to solve the problem. So yeah, I guess that's my take on that. It's really, for me, a problem of not tackling all the causes at the same time. That is a big barrier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I really admire the scale at which your organization and this project is working. One of my, like I said, I've said it before, animals don't care about the lines we draw on the map, and the scale at which you guys are working is really admirable. Okay, and we'll throw to you, Matt, for your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, well, I think all really good covers. I'll probably just build on I suppose the permitting elements and some of those things that we sort of come across on a daily basis. And I think a lot of it also comes down to the perception of risk profile, particularly when talking about threatened species. So, you've got species at such critically low levels that, what Simon was talking about in his previous point around just trying things and then learning the outcomes in real time rather than being predictive in terms of the results, because we don't actually know what's going to occur. That's really hard to advocate for, and rightly so. Like when you lose a species, you lose it for good. So finding those mechanisms where we actually treat those immediate symptoms, and that's sort of what our model's about. Is foxes and cats are a massive driver of decline of many small marsupials, but they're not necessarily the only driver, and historical habitat loss and things like that were key. But we need to treat those symptoms so we can build the populations up to a level where there's a sort of a risk appetite balance between, well, we've got, security in our model, we're securing genetic resilience, we're securing climate adaptation potential, and all these things we need for healthy populations of animals, so that we can then look at trying to address some of the broader picture, which is effectively the returning to landscape approach. And that's sort of in our specific lens. So it's not, it's none of this is easy, and none of the approach is, there's no like set answer to it. I wish there was. But it's sort of that, yeah, it's that early engagement piece, and really working through that sort of process with the long-term horizon, I think is just absolutely fundamental. And, you know, getting the community on board and as a driving factor, getting, you know, traditional owners to be real key drivers of these sort of programs. And then us as sort of supporting mechanisms as NGOs and in that sort of space too, to try and bring the political bumps out of the funding cycles and the approaches, so that we've got that sort of longer term trajectory view.
Yeah, no, the policy piece is particularly, it's particularly with what Tia was saying, the policy piece and the permit piece. It's particularly frustrating when they're our partners in these projects, and you know they should understand the approach and the need for that consistency.
But I don't think it's not from a place of it's not from a place of putting up blocks for the sake of it. I think it's from a place of a good intent and good intentions of how it's built. It's just the way in which it can work. I think it all comes down to communication, really, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all so much. So we'll jump onto our next question, which is, so each of your work and your projects that we're highlighting takes a different approach in some way or shape or form. And I'd be really interested to understand what made that shift possible. So what made that different approach that we're highlighting today? Was it structural, cultural, strategical? Was it a key person in your organization? Was it a funding opportunity? What was it that allowed you to take that approach for this topic that other people might have touched on previously? And we will start with, let's start with you, Simon.
Okay, well, my first point in this was just simply I just wrote Anissa Lawrence. Anissa Lawrence is the founder of the OceanEarth Foundation. Look, it took 7 or 8 years of Anissa badgering me and objecting to my views and opinions for me to finally come to the conclusion I should have come to all along, that all projects have to be community co-designed, otherwise they fail, basically. I think the other thing that for me has been stepping aside, writing the first book, clearing my mind of everything I previously thought I knew about ecology and our interaction with it, and starting from scratch. And that came from probably spending more time with people in more remote parts of the world that weren't conservationists, and just simply talking to them and seeing what they experienced and understanding that through their eyes. The majority of the world doesn't think the way we do. They're just connected. They're connected in a much more, in a stronger way, and a much more basic way. And I think, and a lot of those societies, including our own Indigenous society in Australia, are storytelling cultures. Storytelling is in our DNA. We tell stories. Nothing else matters. Our culture is connected to it. So whatever we do with science, we have to combine a community approach with the critical need to be able to convey stories to each other, not scientific facts all the time, but actual cultural, nuanced discussion about how we feel being in the environment. And that is so powerful. And I've seen the change in me as a person individually hugely, and I'm now seeing that change kind of iterate through the projects we're doing. It's immensely exciting. But as I say, my most of my thanks go to Anissa, though. Is hopefully sitting in the background blushing, because she deserves it.
Yes, I echo the sentiments that Anissa deserves a lot of credit in transitioning this conversation in our industry in Australia, at the very least. For anyone who doesn't know, Anissa Lawrence is the managing director of OceanEarth Foundation. Okay, thank you so much. I've lost track of who has had a turn what time, so I'm going to randomly pick and jump to Tia next.
So I think this is an important one for us, because I guess what we're doing with Project Restore is slightly different. So Project Restore is based at Sydney Institute of Marine Science, which is essentially, I guess, the overarching institute that brings together the 4 major universities in New South Wales and in Sydney. So the cool thing about that is that we can then all work together. So I think collaboration has been really important for this project. So as mentioned before, we're made up of 4 existing projects. So Living Seawalls, Operation Crayweed, Operation Posidonia, and Reef Pods. Now these are all 4 projects. Some have been running for, up to since 2018, as I said before. Reef Pods is the newest one of the project. And essentially Project Restore has been able to happen because these 4 projects were already existing. They've obviously had lots of learnings, their methodologies are already there, and we've just been able to bring them all together and sort of look at it in a more strategic way and think, okay, what can happen if we combine all of our resources and collaborate together, and look at what learnings we have, and essentially try and pool our resources to get a bigger impact overall. So yeah, I think that's been a way that we can sort of look at things again more holistically, rather than just being siloed into each project. So not only does it bring together, I guess, the actual scientific parts of the project, but we've also been able to sort of tap into each other's existing communities, and also the scientific minds behind each project as well. So yeah, I think collaboration and community is just so important for these projects.
Yeah, I love that, especially whenever I work with small community groups and I try to encourage them to think broad. They think they have to solve all the world's problems, and that's not true. If you're aware of the broad landscape, just start with something. And the fact that these 4 projects had that awareness but started with something and then could build into something bigger, I think is a really good testament to, still achieving and doing whilst just being aware. Yeah, thank you.
That's right.
Okay, and I'll jump to Matt next.
Yeah, I think the people are everything within an organization, and pretty early on in Odinada's founding, having that sort of, I think it was a slogan of the business of biodiversity as the piece, and actually understanding how to make the organization sustainable in the long run, through sort of backgrounds, I guess, from our founder Nigel Sharp, in not only a business sense, but then understanding how business can work for nature too, in that sort of sense as well. And that sort of set a foundation for the foundation itself to continue on and scale the work that had sort of been centered around Mount Rothwell and now is sort of across Southeast Australia and Southwestern Australia as well. And so that was a really critical component. And I think just also really understanding where your point of difference and how you communicate that and what that point of difference is really key. There's a lot of NGOs out there, and it can be a competitive space at times, which I don't necessarily agree with. And I think that comes down to that sort of risk profile and scarcity mindset piece again that seeps in a lot. But really knowing where your differences are and where you're and where you're adding value, I think is critical, to doubling down at that and then communicating that too. So that's been a really important part of us, being sustainable, to allow us to roll on and do the work that we do.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, Nigel Sharp's reputation precedes him, so I'm sure it really is, sets the culture within and the success of the organization. Okay, and Mark, I'd love your thoughts on this one.
Right. Well, I guess if I want to be perfectly honest, I don't know if I can say that the shift has been possible yet. I'm pretty sure what I'm sure about is that the shift was necessary and is necessary, because we are kind of failing and losing the race here on a number of issues, like the sea turtle issues. I guess there are far more conservationists today and NGOs and even funding than 30, 40 years ago, but still we are failing. So the shift is really, really necessary. And so that's whether or not it's possible. Hopefully we've started something, and we clearly saw that it was necessary to take the problem in a different way, with a clear shift on the way we're doing things. But hopefully in a few years from now, I would be able to clearly answer this question and say, yes, it's been possible, and we've made a change. But yeah, I don't want to be pessimistic. I don't want to be too optimistic either. But clearly, what's I think is really important is this shift is first to take to realize that global knowledge on the problematic, and I keep on my example, sea turtles. Global knowledge on the problematics of sea turtle conservations, meaning by that, well, we know your population is threatened in the region, and you have less and less individuals. Well, this global knowledge is clearly not enough to make things move. You do need to, and there is a very ugly expression in French, and I won't translate it, but basically it means put your nose into the problem and show your responsibility to really starting make a difference and get people to move. And I think that's really true for turtles. You do need to show that you're the cause of the problem, or you are the victim of the problem, to get you starting on the thing that really matters. And it's not just global knowledge or any average of population status or whatever that allows to get people moving. You do need to really be involved directly into the problematic, again, as a victim or as a cause of the problem. And that's I'm hoping that is the shift that was made through the project I talk about. It's really to give the clear pattern of where the problem comes from, what are the real consequences of this problem, and get people to make those connections, those physical connection of where the issues are, where the problem are, where the threats are, and hopefully through that to that more direct way of putting the problem, getting some more reaction and some more ambition also to deal with those problems.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's not pessimistic. I often think that in our goal of finishing on a high note or offering hope or offering positivity and not to be doom and gloom, we greenwash real problems that really need to be highlighted. So I really appreciate your honesty there. And we don't live in a just and sustainable world. So we haven't seen transformational change on a full scale yet. We're all still existing in that shift in each of our different, topics that we work in. So thank you. Okay, that wraps up the pre-prepared questions that we have for our panelists, but I'd love to shift into a Q&A now quickly with the audience. So I see there's a couple in the chat already. So those attendees online, please, if you have any, either for the whole panel or directed, please put them in the chat. But we'll start with Lizzie's first question. Bear with me, I'm going to read the whole thing out. I know, Lizzie, I know it's going to be of value, but you've got to let me read the whole thing. Okay. We often talk about views and values in transformative change, educating and engaging the public to care about these issues in the hope that they take those concerns to the polling stations or take actions themselves. Something I struggle to understand with this point is that research suggests that the concern is high. For example, in the 2024 Attitudes Towards Nature study from the Biodiversity Council, it showed that 86% of Australians are worried about the decline of native species, but nature receives just 0.1% of federal budget. Similarly, the YouGov research from the UK, 84% of Brits acknowledge the view that the climate is changing, but policy and funding towards climate action is abysmal. She'd love to hear the panel's view on this disconnect between views and values and action and funding. Put it to the panel. Whoever wants to jump in on that one is more than welcome to take themselves off mute.
I'm happy to have first crack.
Great.
It's a great question. And I think when you see those stats come out, it's like alarming. And I think generally it's a good representative. I think a lot of people do care and are concerned. I don't think it's from a lack of concern. I think it's also on the relativity scale of what are people most concerned about too. And you come through, say, the last few years and understanding, the economic pressure that people are under day to day, and some of these points, where it sort of pales in comparison to those things, I think is where you do start to see that funding gap and representation, particularly from a government funding perspective. I think that, we've got to really show that the environmental is not subtractive from those other issues. and that it can be, as sort of Simon articulated, I think everyone sort of works towards it. It's the thing that actually underpins life on Earth, and is that sort of yeah, it's not a political issue, it's not a issue of concern. It should be, it's the thing that underpins all of us. And so a lot of the work when talking around, say, this business of biodiversity approach that sort of founded Odinata was looking at how we can work with the environment in the economic and, say, the agricultural context for an example, and showing that it is actually beneficial towards productivity and beneficial towards farmers to look after the environment and species in particular on their farms. It's not something that comes at a cost, but the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and it is additive as well. And I think that working with corporate Australia and bit by bit trying to work through that approach to make them understand these some kind of components, and then giving them real case studies as well to adopt and take, I think is really key. Showing the show and see approach is really important, and I think that is sort of key to addressing some of that funding gap piece. Because I don't think it's just on government to bridge the funding gap. I think it's on everyone and all of us really. So yeah, I think that's sort of my response to that.
Great, thank you.
I'll add something to that. 100% agree. I think it's interesting, going back to what I said at the beginning, when I present to community groups, they don't talk about financial accounting of nature. They talk about the way they feel, okay? So the majority of the way of our economic productivity is driven by the way we feel about nature, which when we feel very strongly, everyone feels strongly about it, as Lizzie has pointed out in these studies. But we make decisions. Currently, we have an economy which is based in this kind of virtual reality, which is separate to nature, okay, which is using tangible financial drivers to make decisions. I would say, just on the more very positive note, it is changing really rapidly. I mean, we would never have been having this conversation 10 years ago. 10 or 15 years ago, we were working as consultants trying to kind of balance nature against business, and we all thought we were doing the right thing, and we realized now we weren't. Now has come a time where the old way of doing things is no longer working. So values and those less tangible values are needed now. So nature-based solutions are coming into being. Economies are transforming. It's going to take a number of years. My advice to anyone listening here is, as a community member, is to think about that. So stop thinking about the negative and the problem-oriented issues. Start celebrating the values that you have and share with your community, and act as a community, and prepare yourself to be able to receive funds when they become available from other sources, whether it be your local council, a private benefactor locally, or whatever. But there's a change coming. I can't tell you what it's going to look like yet, but it's very interesting. I think there's a monumental shift occurring at the moment. I'd be very interested to hear what the other panelists might have to say about that as well. But I'm quite optimistic about this. I think we've got a few years to go yet, but the signs are there.
Thank you. I will absorb your optimism, because sometimes I'm missing that in my life. One thing I'd add to Lizzie's question there is that something, I think I've said it in every single one of these webinars I've hosted so far, is that we think that our engagement with decision makers starts and ends at the polls, and it doesn't. We have their email addresses, they're part of our community. If you have strong values, we shouldn't just be waiting for a 4 or 3 year cycle to be sharing those. Constantly engaging and making sure that your values are heard. I often tell my friends that our politicians do not follow you on Instagram. If you want your voices heard, you need to take it to them. So maybe if we can, make those values that clearly a lot of us do hold a little bit louder, and make sure that they are being explained, and that our decision makers have the eco-literacy that we have and sometimes we take for granted, that might do something to shift that, or I hope.
Be kind and encouraging, though, and don't assume that they're somehow different to you. They're feeling the same pressures. They are just like we are. Be kind, compassionate, supportive. They're a member, as you say, they're a member of your local community. So use them and engage with them and take them on the journey with you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. If neither of our panelists had any other elements to add to that, I have one question that I'd love to put to the panelists, and we'll make it a rapid fire round just so that we can close out on time. So I'd love to hear from those who have it. In a hypothetical world where you have a global megaphone and you can share one message to one group of people, is it funders, it's community leaders, it's decision makers, whoever it be, or it's project managers. If you have one message that you wish that one group of people would collectively understand or be able to hear, what would that be?
Anyone go on? I went before. Someone else want to go before me? Okay, I'll start. I'd say I'd like to see every project housed within a comprehensive socio-ecological framework, one that recognizes the true participation of communities and where every action is co-designed. I think we would instantly unlock enormous potential for transformational change, and we'd be able to scale threatened species recovery more rapidly, far more rapidly than we are currently.
I love it. Louder in the back. Anybody else? You don't have to. It's a rapid fire question.
That's a really hard act to follow. But I think maybe it doesn't roll off the tongue quite as clear as that did. But I think just in terms of policy reform and seeing action, and even being able to try to get to that point with licensing and approvals, we just want clear, efficient, and realistic approval pathways to just take out all of the ambiguity and confusion. I think we can get a lot more out of that for threatened species for the future.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. Matt or Mark, do you have any? Yeah, Matt.
I think, yeah, just, I'm not sure who you'd say it to, but whoever, just keep practicing cautious optimism. Don't be too avert, but we need to keep going, keep fighting, and everyone bringing their own individual strengths to the table to continue on pushing. So I think that yeah, that's probably something that I value a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We need every different kind of voice. Thank you. Mark.
Well, it's kind of a pretty much copy of what just Matt said, but I was about to go with the very WWF together, together everything is possible, together is possible. But also the fact that, yeah, I think we need to be strong. The time, I don't know from where you are, but I know in France and so in New Caledonia, things are difficult for us at the moment. We need to cover ourselves with a lot of strength and courage and patience, because times have been better. It's strange. It's really counter the currents. Why the question before was very interesting, because we do feel that the opinion is not moving the right direction, unfortunately. And but we know we're right. We know we're fighting the good thing, and it's not just for nature, it's for all of us. So yeah, we need to stay on the right track, and yeah, the tide will turn, I'm sure, hopefully sooner than later. And yeah, together everything's possible.
Great. Thank you so much. And what a wonderful note to wrap up our conversation on. So I want to say thank you so much to our panelists, to our attendees, to people watching this back later. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. And something I always like to encourage at the end of these conversations is to don't let it end here. If something sparked for you, take that conversation and continue it with your colleagues or your family members, or your friends. And maybe think about how you might integrate some of the ideas we've heard today in your approach and your work. We'd love to keep this conversation going with you online. Feel free to engage on social media. And if you have any burning questions or topics that you'd like us to explore in our future webinars, please feel free to get in touch. And we hope to join and have a conversation with you again soon. So thank you again to all of our panelists and all of our attendees for joining online. And good night.